Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman, and this is the Apple iPad mini. Let's get into the review. Now, I say iPad mini, but that's the name that Apple gives to every iPad. This is technically the iPad mini 2024 or the iPad mini 7th generation or the iPad mini A17 Pro, depending on how you want to call it. But it's the latest update to Apple's smallest tablet. And I know it's got its fans out there. I've always been a little bit middle of the road about it. And this generation's version, yeah, I'm having a hard time loving it. It's not a bad tablet, but I just feel like Apple should have done a whole lot more with it to make it a really compelling prospect over and above either the entry-level iPad, the iPad Air, or even the iPad Pro. They're just features that it feels like this one is missing. So in design terms, so very little has changed from the 6th generation model. You're still staring at the same 8.3-inch liquid retina IPS display, resolution of 2266 by 1488 with a 60 Hz refresh rate. And that to me is a little bit problematic. Now I get this is the iPad mini. It's not as though they're going to say now with a huge screen because it's the iPad mini Max with a 75-inch display. No, of course not. There's only so much you can do with a small form factor. But Apple, it kind of feels like they've basically done nothing here. And the one that really grates with me there is the 60 Hz refresh rate. And yes, that's also the case for the regular iPad and the Air. If you want 120 Hz or ProMotion in Apple speak, then you've got to go for an iPad Pro. But that just feels to me as though Apple's just making an upsell because it can. Saying, oh no, ProMotion is only for the Pro tablets. Everyone else can just make do with 60 Hz. Let's face it, there's so many cheaper devices, cheaper phones especially, that can handle better than 60 Hz refresh rates, and they do. But this just doesn't. And that doesn't quite feel right, especially because the iPad mini costs more than the regular iPad. And this feels like a very obvious statement, but you're getting less screen here, and I've long felt that in return for that, Apple should be charging less. You're getting less, so you should pay less. Instead, you pay more. Now, the one design change, I guess, this year are the color choices. You've got space gray, starlight, blue, and purple. And they do look nice. Apple has loaned me a space gray, which is very much your stock standard iPad color. So this one really does just look like every other iPad you've pretty much ever seen. But it's nice to have those color choices. It kind of amuses me that the cheaper Apple gets, the more color it offers its users. If you go up the pay scales, you get fewer choices. That's always felt slightly weird to me, but maybe you have a different viewpoint. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. The iPad mini A17 Pro is also Apple Pencil compatible, which is great if you're an Apple Pencil user with a slight sting in the tail. It supports the Apple Pencil Pro with all of its squeezy, tilty gestures, but only the Apple Pencil Pro. If you've got the older 2nd generation Apple Pencil, which would work with prior versions of the iPad mini, you're out of luck. It won't work. And I get that new features are great to have, and again, I'm not really an Apple Pencil kind of guy, but I appreciate that some people are, and for some, this might be a nice small notepad kind of device. But again, it feels like an upsell that Apple says, well, we have all these different models of Apple Pencil, and you've got to make sure that you've got the right one for this generation, or you've got to pay us quite a bit of money to just upgrade your pencil. Again, that doesn't sit entirely right with me. Of course, Apple's pitch for the iPad mini is that this doesn't matter because it's a more powerful tablet. It's a little pocket rocket. And there we've got to get comparative, because the 6th generation model, which came out in 2021, ran on an Apple A15 Bionic, which in some senses meant that it was a slightly oversized iPhone 14. And with Apple's big push into Apple Intelligence, and the fact that, for example, the iPad Air model they released this year runs on an Apple M2 chip, you might think, right, well, this is going to run on an M-series chip. As I've already said, it doesn't. It runs on the A17 Pro. And that means it's basically an iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max under its hood. And look, that's a reasonably powerful phone, even now. There should be some scope for performance improvements over the older iPad mini. And indeed, that's what you see. So using Geekbench 6's CPU test, for example, here's a comparison of those two tablets. And yeah, the iPad mini A17 Pro does wipe the floor with the older version in terms of processing power. It is a more powerful tablet than its predecessor, but that feels like table stakes to me. That's absolutely the case. The newer device should be faster. It's nowhere near as flattering a picture, however, if we look at the wider iPad family. I do wish that I had the regular iPad and had benchmarks for it, but I just don't, unfortunately. However, the gulf here between those M series units and this, it's not a small one. And while that won't play into every iPad OS app you're going to run, the vast majority of them will run okay. It is going to hit those higher end applications, those AAA games that Apple is so keen to promote as part of the iPad family, and potentially also the Apple Intelligence features, which have just launched here in Australia at the time of doing this review. And those run, yes, right now, but AI is an evolving field, and it's not hard to see that at a certain point Apple's going to go, well, okay, the M series chips are powerful enough, but the A series ones are not. Therefore, sorry iPad mini owners, you don't get newer Apple Intelligence features, if that matters to you. Then we come to the battery, and the smaller size of the iPad mini, of course, limits the quantity of batteries that Apple can throw into it. And maybe that's why Apple didn't make the jump up to the M2 processor. But then again, the M2 has shown itself to be quite power efficient, so maybe not. In any case, Apple never actually talks about real-world battery capacity numbers for any of its products, noting just that the iPad mini's 19.3 watt-hour battery should be good for up to 10 hours of either wireless web surfing or watching video. And that is actually the same claim that it makes for the regular iPad and iPad Air models. But of course, up to can give you a lot of wriggle room. And the reality of using the iPad mini is it's not that strong a battery performer. Now, your battery life is always going to depend on the apps that you use, but given the A17 Pro's former life as the processor behind the Apple iPhone 15 Pro, I thought it might be interesting to run my standard YouTube 1-hour battery test across the iPad mini. So this is a 1080p video, maximum brightness, moderate volume for an hour from a fully charged battery, just to see where the two compared, and this is what that picture looks like. And that's not a good result, especially given that while the model Apple loaned me was the Wi-Fi Plus cellular variant, it didn't actually have an eSIM enabled in it at the time. If you were running an eSIM as well, you could actually expect that battery life figure to be a little bit worse again. And look, in more anecdotal use, 10 hours, I'm not seeing it. 6 to 7, maybe, but I could really want more from a tablet, and typically I will get a little bit closer to Apple's figures than I see on this particular tablet, which again just makes me think, Apple, you should have done a little bit more with this unit. So should you buy the iPad mini? Well, look, if you're a die-hard iPad mini aficionado who's simply been hanging out for a faster device, especially if you're coming from one of the models prior to the 6th generation, then look, the iPad mini A17 Pro will do what you want in a size that works for you. I absolutely recognize that there's a market for that. But the problem is, I feel you really, truly have to adore that smaller form factor in some very specific ways for that to be a sensible buy. The regular iPad, sure, it has the same lock to 60Hz screen issues of the iPad mini A17 Pro, but it's got a lot more screen real estate, and it's a bigger device. You get more screen. It's better for things like content consumption in a general sense. The Air is nicer again and more powerful, and yes, it can be more expensive, but actually there are some variants of the iPad mini that are just as expensive as the iPad Air. If you're after a more professional workspace, sure, the iPad mini A17 Pro is Apple Pencil compatible, but you'll have to spend more on a new Apple Pencil if you've already got that kind of workflow in place. And all of this adds up to a tablet that is, at best, I feel, fine for what it is, but not great at the price that Apple wants for it. I can't see for the general consumer why this is the iPad you should opt for. I think every other iPad is slightly better in very specific ways, and that only leaves this as, hi, I'm the tiny iPad. And I don't feel like that's enough.